And I know vouchers have gone around, so make sure you're checking your email and signing, approving vouchers that you have to sign. Is there any public comment? Okay. Is there a motion for approval of minutes of 20 May 2024?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, next would be the superintendent update, which is so nicely queued up.
So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the end of the 24-25 school year. Imagine that. I'd like to start, like I always do, with a reading of our service promise, which is to interrupt educational inequities and creating schools where every child and staff member thrives, one conversation at a time. Our enrollment is unchanged from May at 1,417 students. Staffing updates. It's that time of year where there's movement around staff. There's been some changes in the last time that you saw this list. There's been some jobs that were filled and some jobs that have popped in, but it's not an overwhelming. When I look at it and I know what's in the queue and I see applications come in, I'm not at this point feeling overwhelmed. And again, you can go to the link there on that slide when this is posted on our agenda on the AOS website. You can sort of take a look and scroll through what jobs are available at all of the schools. I did want to share a little something about sort of supporting full employment. And at the beginning of last year, there was a lot of struggles, particularly around ed techs. But some of the things that we'll be doing in this office as we sort of move through the summer and heading into next year. And I think once all our June board meetings are over, we'll sort of take a look, assess that list that you see in the boxes above, see which ones are filled, and see which things that we still have needs. And then what we'll do is all those jobs will refresh on the remaining ads in the job platforms that we use, and probably throw out a combined newspaper ad. And what that means when you refresh on the platforms is usually your jobs will jump to the top of the list. So if you can get to the top of the list majority of the summer for our needs, that would be helpful. One of the other things that we'll do is we'll send notices to the job fair list that students at both Farmington and UMO sort of filled out, and to invite them to apply. So we'll just sort of do that little blanket to sort of cover those bases. And that'll include, we'll have a little blurb about the job, and then salary benefits data that we have so they can see that. We did pick up one individual who did fill out one of those forms, who is now going to be teaching at Mount Desert Elementary School. So, that's an awesome thing. And then probably plan an August job fair, and that'll be probably particularly aimed at support staff. And so as people are winding down their summer employment, we might be looking forward to do something here that might attract some people. So those are some of the things that we're thinking in terms of support. And most of my central office staff have unique connections in their fields, whether it's curriculum or special education, and they already utilize those connections to, whether it's teachers or others, to maybe find people to draw in, and we'll continue to sort of utilize our connections as we sort of look at that landscape in terms of looking at employment for the beginning of the new school year. Already talking about the new school year, and we're finishing up this one. Some of the school highlights, one of my favorite parts of the report. The high school, of course, had their graduation, and that kind of, was an awesome day, and the gym was filled. Wasn't as warm as some previous ones, but it was still warm. But there were great speeches by the students who were selected. Balike, did I say that correctly? Lynch and Sig Reinhold gave wonderful pointed speeches, and Sig gave us something that there was much to learn from fish. If you go onto the high school website, and you could see the graduation and listen to both of their speeches. But we have things to learn from fish, so that's a neat thing. There's a great ending for athletics. Boys tennis, as we were at the high school meeting, they're doing the finals coming up. Baseball, they played in the semifinals in Ellsworth. There was a little sun, there was a little rain, there was a little excitement that maybe, and then, it's baseball. And, a few things can just turn a game. But they played really hard. And the girls' track team got the PVC sportsmanship award for their work. Over at Ashley Bryan School, boat work shed project is near completion. I was over there on a Friday, and it was raining, but the kids were out there doing their boat work, so they had a tarp over the rafters, and they were finishing that work. And for the end of the year, students are headed to Great Cranberry for a museum visit and a tour of the island. Frenchboro, on June 12th, that they're having their end of school celebrations, and the folks will be going out to experience that. At Connors Emerson, they had their class trip, which is an epic ride down the Kennebec, and if you've never done that, it is actually really fun and exciting. Dungeon and Dragon Club had their final meeting of the year, and the 4th grade presented their research to the school board on potentially composting kitchen waste for next year, and sort of running through all of the questions that they had in their research, trying to figure out the best ways to do it, whether you do it on site, do you send it off, and they still have some work to do, and they did a great presentation to the board last Monday. Over at the Trenton School, they are being promoted tonight, and they have redesigned their field day to be a full-day event to support more variety, both inside and outside adventures. They're going to be doing some karaoke, so there'll be some sports activities and all of that, but there's also going to be some face painting and karaoke and all that to make it, a fun and exciting day. And they have an outdoor stage in the corner, and that's where they did their spring concert this year, amongst the insects, but I heard it went really well to be outside and to do their concert that way. 6th graders at Pematic attended the MLTI conference at UMO. The pre-K had a nice little exploration over to Ship Harbor, and the 4th and 5th grade chickens were hatched and went home, and the salmon are being released to the wild. Did somebody get chickens?
No, we
No,
read
we
that
read
4 out of 5.
Oh, 4, 5, sorry. 4th and 5th chickens, 4th and 5th grade chickens. We'll change that slide before we post it. 4 or 5 chickens, actually. The Swans Island School, they had their bike-a-thon day on March 17th. It was a Saturday to make up for a snow day. They are doing their Friday swim days have wrapped up, and it's something that they're just getting back to post-COVID. And I did talk about their tick research that they're doing, but it was on News Center 2, so that link there goes to the story of the research and work that the kids were doing over on swans. At Mount Desert Elementary, the 8th graders had their promotion ceremony, which included 3 Cranberry Island students, and those 2 boards are continuing with that work of sending over the middle schools and talking about the possibility of sort of capping a certain number of 2nd grade to possibly 6th grade students to maybe go the other way, and there's still some conversations to have about that, and it's just some interesting conversations of families that might be interested in doing a year in a one-room schoolhouse. The scientists at the Jackson Lab visited to teach students about bacteria, and the 7th graders were doing research on epidemics, both social and medical and history, and they did a podcast session. They were over at the Mellon Room doing that. Tremont Consolidated School, the 8th graders went to Boston and saw the Red Sox and did a bunch of those wonderful activities around history and just exploring the city. They had their spring concert and barbecue, and the kindergarten learning celebration was June 5th. In terms of our budgets, we had Trenton Pass since the last time we met. We had Bar Harbor Pass since the last time we met, And the last budget on our list would be French Borough. The school board passed their budget on the 21st of May, and you can see that their budget to budget was a 9.17. Their assessment was 3%, and then I go out next week, next Wednesday, that the date is wrong for the town meeting, for their town meeting. In terms of highlighting some staff across the district, Steve Kablinski from the high school. After 2 semesters, they launched the, I think it's pronounced Alcan 13, which is a boat.
Don't look at me, I ignore all of it.
The students built. If you ever went down to the shop, you would have seen it from the beginning of the year when it was just forms to a fully formed boat. And there's a great video that was created of them sort of launching that, with Dan Stillman came out of retirement to video it, and so that link is there, and it's pretty exciting to watch. I wanted to share that after some really heartfelt thinking and deep reflecting, Sue Hodgson from Tremont will be retiring. She has been in this district for 32 years and supporting the students at Tremont, and I remember seeing her teaching when I was a science teacher at Connors Emerson, and going to Tremont to meet with the science teachers on what we called common study days, but they were different, you know, we called them differently, and working with her. And so I think it was, you know, bittersweet, but she has had a long and storied career, and it's much loved and will be missed, but looking forward to her new road. And then, as Matt has said at the high school meeting, Rebecca Lehman here at the high school was named the main curriculum instructional coach of the year by the main curriculum leaders. And I wanted to read the little thing that they sort of put out because I think that encapsulates, and that is that Rebecca has an unwavering commitment to educational excellence since she has poured her heart and soul into enhancing instructional practices within AOS 91, demonstrating a profound dedication to equity in middle and high school education. Rebecca has also demonstrated her own love of learning by continuing to advance her knowledge in coaching strategies and student-centered instruction. Becky has been here since 1989. When I shared this with the staff a couple of high school staff meetings ago, I had to dig back in the files. And do you want to know what a starting salary was for a teacher in 1989?
Ouch.
$18,000 a year to do the work that they do. I think we've come a long way in supporting the profession of teaching, and I think it's something to recognize that we're lifting up that important role. But so I wanted to share that. And just some basic overall update to the district. A little bit at the high school around the wastewater. Senator King did accept our application, which basically is just a foot in the door. As you can imagine, there's probably a lot of people requesting funds, and I'm going to reach out to Susan Collins' office because I haven't heard back from them yet, because probably the more feet we have, the better, so we'll be doing that. And I wanted to share, because it's a big deal, on the 20th, Connors Emerson will be opening the bids for the construction of the new school. It's a huge milestone, so that will be happening here. Reorganization, we have our meeting on Wednesday, our June meeting, and we're going to be reviewing the governance that we sort of talked about at our last meeting, and really trying to fill out what that looks like, spending some time on that to really tighten up what we're calling that bucket. And I'll be working on sort of, now that we're sort of moving along with the RPC, finding ways to share more of the good work that group is doing. I think we've had some really good discussions, and I want to be able to broadcast sort of where we are as we start looking towards bringing information to broader meetings. But we really want to have something formed for people to be able to sort of chew on when we start going town to town and talking about our hopes and dreams of reorganizing. So there's that. And then the school board corner. We have some, not a lot of the new members here, but often it sort of comes up as a question of the role of the board chair. So I sort of wanted to share a little bit of that because they're a big support for particularly new members. And so number one, the board chair is sort of the planner and the organizer, and they assist the superintendent in preparing the preparation of meetings and chairs the school committee meetings. They're sort of the spokesperson or official spokesperson for the school committee. They're the delegators, so in terms of creating subcommittees and asking for folks to participate on those or ask the superintendent to gather information for future meetings, sort of a liaison and confidant to other members of the board, and they kind of act as a caretaker of the relationships between you all in terms of the important decisions that you have to make when it comes to the, running the educational institutions in our district. So that will be there on the agenda for you all to look back to if you ever want to remember what does the board chair do. If you're thinking about being an assistant, that comes up. If you wanted to be the assistant chair or the vice chair, those questions come up and you can say, well, sometimes you might have to do these 5 things. And so that is my report.
Are there questions for Mike?
Not a question, but I love the school highlights. Like, it makes me feel very connected to places I don't know much about. It's my favorite. It's my favorite part.
I would say it's my favorite part because it helps me get into schools, but it also forces me to look at newsletters, pay really close attention when principals are doing their principal report because they share a lot. That sort of helps me. But it sort of really gives a really broad picture of the experiences that our students have. And there's a lot of similar experiences and a lot of unique experiences. And it's really exciting to know that those are the things that our students are getting able to do in the various schools throughout. What's really interesting is how connected they are. And even when you think of Frenchborough and Connors Emerson, particularly within size, but when you think about some of the work that they're doing, they're awfully connected as well.
Any other questions? Okay, moving on to Directors of Teaching and Learning, Julie and Rhonda.
Okay, let me just steal the screen here. I'm just going to project the notes, so if you'd prefer to just look at it on the laptop. Let's see. It's library, right? Okay, everyone's favorite topic, grading and reporting. It's the currency that we have. It's really probably one of the most contested topics, and it's really important. And it was also, what I'm about to share was in Matt's report, but he had a lot in there. So I am gonna talk fully and thoroughly because I want to make sure we get this. Robin Sutabli, do you remember her? A couple years ago asked me, is proficiency-based education working? And Rhonda and I sat down and said, well, we've got to report out on this, right? So we pulled our metrics and everything was pointing to yes. Now, it still keeps coming up, right? And some of our neighboring towns have even dropped it. And so we took another good hard look at it again this fall, particularly with the Schoology backdrop, right? And I think I've shared this before, and I'm sorry I keep talking about Schoology over and over again, but when we set it up, we replicated what we had already established beforehand. And what we established beforehand had to be rigged into PowerSchool. It wasn't designed to do that. And so when we had the two systems working, they didn't talk to each other. And then there's this big question, well, why did we do it that way in the first place? And well, we do have a history of saying we want to do it our own way, right? That's practice. Don't let the technology dictate stuff. But clearly we were having a problem. And when we have a problem, what Rhonda and I do is we hit the books. Okay, it's been a while since we learned about the latest research. So let's dig in. So we read Equity-Based Grading, because that's the latest and the greatest. And it is really at the heart of what proficiency-based education is. And really, very simply, it's about grades serving as communication, right, of what kids know, understand, and can do. Not compensation, where you're kind of padding grades and masking what they know based on behavior and so forth. But how you do that varies. And schools across the state set it up different. There was no one model that said, this is how you do it. Our school probably had the greatest amount of controversy with it, particularly at the high school. And the reason being is because at the high school, the way we set it up was that every course was going to have a list of standards that were taught and assessed. Each one would be weighted equally and averaged, and that would create your course grade. Now, the moment you do something like that, you're really not reporting out on standards. You've kind of obfuscated it, right? So the course grade, though, is supposed to represent those course standards. From the start, I had teachers say, well, this standard is kind of small in comparison to this standard and really isn't of equal value and shouldn't be represented in the same weight. And the answer was, well, for some students, that might be more easy or challenging than another, and so they should all be treated the same. And it really never set right exactly. And so we have these rules that sort of worked for some disciplines, not for all disciplines, and we also told them how to set their grade books up. So everything you collect and give evidence on, anything with a standard, is considered body of evidence. Whether it's a quiz or a test or a project, whatever the evidence is of equal weight and value. It's all kind of into this pot. It's all the evidence. And then you decide at the end what the real score is. And then there's always this kind of confusion on the part of kids. Well, is this little evidence? Maybe it doesn't really count, right? So maybe I don't have to work as hard on this little evidence because I'm going to put my time and energy into the bigger evidence when the teacher's going to look at that probably to determine my standard score. And then all things prep and practice was just, checks, work completion, habits of work, stuff like that. This also played out at the middle school, but you did see reports on standards. So you did get a report on each standard. The elementary is a little bit of a different animal, so I'll talk about them separately. But what Rhonda and I really kind of paid quite a bit of attention to in this text is that, how you set it up doesn't have to be exactly the same for everybody in every discipline. But there does need to be some rules, right? We need to have some basic rules on what we believe in and how we're scoring. So this became the equity-based grading training that I believe Matt mentioned. And basically there are three principles of it. Grading should be accurate, clearly communicated, reflect a student's academic performance, and parents should understand it. Well, guess what? We haven't done a good job with that in 10 years. They don't understand it. And partly it's because we've set up these programs to do things, and then we're like, well, you look over here for this thing, and if you really want to understand this thing, you have to look over here, which is under, multiple clicks and steps. And so people just go, I don't know, and I'm not going to do that. So we knew, that had to change. The other stuff is pretty consistent, but keeping, giving a little more, so basically what we're doing is giving more decision-making power on the part of the teacher, but still staying true to these principles. So a good example would be like a body of evidence, right? Well, now I can have categories. I have a quiz category, which is my smaller bits of evidence, and my test category, my big bits of evidence. And then I'm still going to create opportunities for students to review things, acknowledge if they've grown in their learning, and make sure that's accurately reflected in their grades. How they do it, we're asking them to have conversations based on their discipline, in their departments, with like-minded coursework to make sure that there's consistency. So that was the conversation, the big, deep conversations that the high school was engaging in, that Matt referenced. I trained the middle school on this, March-ish, can't remember, and then followed up in small group conversations to talk about some more responsibility and ownership that they would have over their grade books. In both instances, they were received really well. So we're kind of rebranding a little bit, right? We're not following the exact same script that we set up 10 years ago. It's here's what equity-based grading is. These are its purposes. It's still using standards. We're still following the main principles, but we're giving a little more discretion and judgment on the part of teachers. So some key pieces in that that I want to highlight is in these conversations, what we have noticed is that there's been some grade inflation, particularly because we've been rounding up in a GPA calculation. So a team of teachers about 10 years ago were really worried that our grades would be negatively impacted if they didn't get like a homework grade compared to their, the competition, I guess, in other high schools, right? Because we don't just give you a homework grade for doing stuff, checks. It's you're getting scores based on evidence you're producing. And we have noticed a slight shift in grade inflation, and that's been a huge complaint on the part of teachers, because if you got a 3.01 in your course in Algebra 1, in your GPA, you got a 3.24. It was a quarter point up. And nobody really knew that unless you read all the paperwork, right? Or you're on the committee, but it's been 10 years. And so, but the people who did do their homework did notice that, and they would, just like all things, start gaming the system, right? I gotta get a 3.01, because that really will give me a 3.24 in my score. But it just didn't make sense to people to do that anymore, because we weren't seeing a problem. We actually were seeing some great inflation happening. So what we've decided to do by committee is a direct relationship. You get a 3.01 on your course grade, you're getting a 3.01 in your GPA calculation. So there's a one-to-one relationship. It's all clear. And that's that. So that's a huge shift. And, people, we're going to communicate that in the fall. But I want you to be aware of that piece. And there was one more high school piece I want to make sure we're getting. I think that was it, actually. That's the big high school piece. Yep. And I think that's it.
Okay. Any questions for Julie and Rhonda? Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Clarity. That's very helpful. Moving on to, there are no discussion items. So now I have action items. First and final reading of policy JB, student attendance on absenteeism and truancy. And the way this is going to work is we're basically restructuring. So if this one passes, then we will delete some redundant policies that no longer apply. These policies are, people might remember from last, were revised to accommodate for changes in law and also to align with our practices. Is there more you want to say about that?
Yeah, the addition of the chronic absenteeism that came down from the state has added to that, and trying to streamline the policies that we have to be able to make it so that staff members and people know where to go. There's one place, so when you go to policies, you'll see what what the policy is around absenteeism, but you'll also be able to see attendance, and then what are the reasons for if your child is absent. So rather than we have multiple policies, some of those policies we don't follow anymore with the change to proficiency education, and then never pull those off. So in streamlining JE, we pass that, and then we'll delete the other two policies that no longer make sense.
All right.
Is there a motion?
Sure. I move approval of policy JE, student attendance.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, is there a motion related to approval to delete the, to now
Yeah.
obsolete policy?
I'll move deletion of policy JHB, truancy,
I think we can do them as a slate and
and JEA-R, attendance and absence required rules and procedures.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that brings us to second reading and adoption of revisions to policy GBEB, ethical and responsible behavior, staff contact with students.
You want to go ahead? Do you want to say something about it before the motion on the floor? Or?
Yeah, this is the second time around. As you recall, this is sort of a way of trying to strengthen and sort of connect in our policies and student conduct and sort of staff conduct that were sort of aligned in the way that we sort of treat each other, and that there are some general expectations in the policy in the past was a little bit more focused on just definitely with conduct with students, but it seemed like it was a more narrow lane that the policy followed, and this is just sort of broadening it to, general expectations. So.
I'll move approval of policy GBEB, ethical and responsible behavior, staff conduct with students.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that brings us to other business. Is there any other business? Okay, future agenda items. We'll have our usual reports and updates and policies.
That'll probably be in September. We'll see a need for August meeting list. If we get like great funding for some project, call everybody in for a celebration.
I did. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you about our opening day plan. And I'm not going to read this to you, but I just want you to know that it's all ready to go. And we usually have this ready to go in June, so people kind of know what they're in for. But this should give you a preview. These are all 3 groups of us continuing to work on the initiatives. It's nothing new here. It's the same stuff, and we're continuing to just work and grow with it. I would invite you to take a look at these offerings.
And one of the things I would highlight in looking at that, one of the things that we put a lot of effort into this year was around the sort of the social emotional learning and the climate and culture experience of the classroom, and really focusing on the responsive classroom practices and making that a district-wide. It covers so many aspects of being a teacher and your relation to students. And when you look at that, you'll notice some folks who will be doing some mini reminder sessions. This is not one and done for us, and this is something that we recognize is really important for teachers to get the support from colleagues and to be refreshed when they come back on some of the practices that make a huge difference in the classroom. And so I'll be doing a little session on envisioning language with students. And so all of the administrators are doing a little part and sort of being part of that. So, there's some important things that we learned in terms of making sure that those things that we know are part of moving forward, and then bringing them back up again and making sure that people are well versed in those practices. So that's part of it. And there's aspects of choice also when you look through that, which is something that teachers had asked for. And so we've tried to be really thoughtful in trying to make sure we're meeting the needs of all of our teachers and the important initiatives we want to continue to move forward, whether that's MTSS Tier 1 practices and also responsive classroom. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
how was that?
Better.
Okay.
That's right over. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Now that brings us to executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A personnel evaluation. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay.
Have a wonderful summer.
All in favor?
I can do that.
Any